want to be careful about how I tell this, because the temptation is to make it sound like more than it was. People do that. They find something that unsettles them and they build it into a story with a shape, a rising action, a climax. They make themselves the hero or the victim. I don't want to do that. I just want to describe what happens in order and let you sit with it the way I've been sitting with it, which is quietly and without resolution. It started the way most of my interests start, which is to say, accidentally, on a weeknight when I should have been doing something else. I've been reading about Waverly Hills, not for any particular reason. I think someone had mentioned it in a podcast I half listened to while cooking, and the name stuck in some idle part of my brain. And later that night I found myself on my laptop looking at photographs. The sanatorium in Louisville, tuberculosis, the body chute. You've probably seen the same pictures I saw. Long hallways with peeling paint, gurneys left in rooms as though someone had simply walked away mid-task, windows that look out onto tree lines that have grown wild and indifferent in the decades since anyone was meant to look through them. I am not a ghost hunter. I want to be clear about that. I don't believe in the paranormal in any functional sense, but I've always been drawn to places that have outlived their purpose. There is a specific quality to a building that was designed to hold people and now holds nothing. It is not haunted. It is just continuing to exist without permission, and something about that feels honest to me in a way I can't fully articulate. So I started collecting these places, not visiting them, just reading. Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Eastern State Penitentiary, the Sanji UFO houses in Taiwan before they were demolished. I bookmarked articles, saved photographs, read first-person accounts from urban explorers who had walked through these spaces with flashlights and respirators. I liked the stillness of it, the way these explorers described the quiet, not silence, they always said. Never silence, there is always sound in an abandoned building, dripping, settling, wind finding new ways through old gaps, but quiet, purposeless sound without an audience. I did this for about 3 weeks. It was a hobby in the way that scrolling is a hobby, which is to say it was a way of not thinking about other things. And at some point during those 3 weeks, I came across a forum post that I almost scrolled past entirely. It was on one of those smaller urban exploration boards. Not Reddit. One of the older style forums with a plain layout and a user base that seemed to have been the same 40 people for the past decade. Someone with a handle I don't remember had written a short post, maybe 4 sentences, asking if anyone else had encountered something they called the archive. No capital letter, no dramatic framing. They described it as a site they'd stumbled on that seemed to collect footage from abandoned locations. They said it wasn't a YouTube channel or a documentary project or anything with branding, just footage, unlabeled, sorted by location. They said it had unsettled them, but they couldn't explain why, and they were wondering if it was a known thing. 2 people had replied. One said they hadn't heard of it. The other said something dismissive about Creepypasta. The thread was 8 months old. I almost moved on. I think I actually did move on. Closed the tab, watched something on television, went to bed. But the post came back to me the next day, not because it was frightening, but because it was so plain. There was no link, no dramatic build-up. It read like someone genuinely asking a question they didn't have the vocabulary to frame properly. And the phrase they used, I couldn't explain why, felt familiar to me in a way that made me want to understand what they'd seen. I went back to the forum and sent the user a private message. I kept it simple. I said I'd seen their post about the archive and asked if they could tell me more about it. I didn't expect a response. The account's last activity was months old. They replied within 2 hours. The message was short. They said they'd found the site through a link embedded in the metadata of a photograph, an image from an urban exploration gallery, a shot of a hallway in some decommissioned hospital in the Northeast. They said they'd been examining the photo for something unrelated and noticed a string in the file data that looked like a URL. They followed it. They described the site as minimal, a dark background, no text except for what appeared to be location names, each one a link. They clicked on one and it loaded a video feed. Grainy, no sound. A fixed camera angle showing an empty corridor. They watched for a few minutes, they said, and nothing happened. Just an empty corridor. They clicked on another location. Same thing. A room, a stairwell, a stretch of road, all empty, all filmed from a fixed position with what looked like very old or very low quality equipment. They told me they'd closed the site and gone about their day and hadn't thought about it again until about a week later, when they remembered it and went back. This time, they said, one of the feeds showed a person. A figure walking through what looked like a basement. The footage was dark and compressed. The person was carrying a flashlight. They moved slowly, the way someone moves when they're alone in a place they're not supposed to be, checking corners, pausing, sweeping the light across walls. The user told me they watched for about 10 minutes, and then the person walked out of the frame, and the feed returned to showing an empty room. They said, it looked like a live stream, but I couldn't tell. I asked if they still had the URL. They said no. They said they'd cleared their history and hadn't been able to find the original photograph again. They said they weren't sure they wanted to. I thanked them, and that was the end of our conversation. They never messaged me again. I should have left it there. I recognize that. But I'd spent weeks looking at photographs of these places, and the idea that someone had set up cameras inside them, not for a show, not for content, just to watch, was the kind of detail that fit so neatly into my quiet fascination that I couldn't let it go. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Someone else was drawn to the stillness, and they'd found a way to sit inside it remotely, permanently. I started looking at the metadata of photographs from urban exploration galleries. I don't want to describe the process in any technical detail, because that isn't the point, and I don't want to give anyone a map to follow. But I will say that it took me the better part of a week, and most of what I found was nothing. And the nothing almost convinced me to stop. Almost. On a Thursday night, in the metadata of an image tagged as being from a closed ward of a state hospital in the Northeast. I am being deliberately vague about which one. I found a string that resolved to a URL. It wasn't hidden in any sophisticated way. It was just there, in a field where it shouldn't have been, like someone had left a door unlocked rather than open. I sat with the URL in my browser's address bar for a long time before I pressed enter. I think I was aware, in some semi-conscious way, that whatever was on the other side of it would change the texture of my interest, that it would stop being a hobby. I pressed enter anyway. The site loaded quickly, which surprised me. I'd expected something slow, something that felt like it was coming from far away, but it loaded the way any normal page loads, and what it showed me was almost exactly what the forum user had described. A dark background, close to black, but not quite. A column of text on the left side. Location names, no headers, no welcome message, no about page. No indication of who had built it or why, just a list. I recognized some of the names, places I'd read about, places I'd bookmarked, a few I hadn't heard of. The list was long, and I didn't scroll to the bottom. I clicked on a name I recognized. A feed loaded in the center of the page. Grainy, low resolution, fixed angle, a room. I could tell it was a room because of the way the light fell from what might have been a window on the far wall, although the image was too degraded to be sure. The room was empty. Nothing moved. There was no sound. In the lower left corner of the feed, there was a string of numbers that I initially took to be a file identifier. But after a moment, I realized was a timestamp. The format was unusual. Not a standard date, time layout, but once I worked out the pattern, I could read it. The timestamp indicated a date approximately 4 years in the past. I clicked on another location. Another feed. Another empty space. This one clearly outdoors, showing what looked like a gravel path, leading toward a structure I couldn't identify. The timestamp was similar. Old years old. I clicked through several more. All the same empty places, old timestamps, fixed angles. No movement, except for what the wind or the light did naturally. I began to feel something I can only describe as the opposite of suspense. A settling. Like watching security footage of a place where nothing has ever happened and nothing ever will. It was boring in the way that genuine surveillance is boring, and the boredom itself felt like evidence of authenticity. No one would stage this. There was nothing to gain from it. I watched for probably an hour, clicking through feeds at random. I saw hallways, basements, rooftops, stretches of empty road, rooms with furniture left behind, rooms with nothing in them at all. Some feeds were so dark I couldn't make out anything. Some were washed out with light. The quality varied, but it was always low, always degraded, always fixed in place, as though the camera had been mounted and forgotten. I closed the site and went to bed. I went back the next night, and the night after that, it became part of my routine, the way checking the news or scrolling through feeds becomes routine. I'd open the site, Click through a few locations, watch the nothing for a while, and close it. I didn't tell anyone about it, not because I felt I was doing something wrong, but because I didn't know how to describe it without making it sound like more than it was. It was just empty rooms. That is all it was. On the 6th or 7th night, I am not certain which, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. I'd clicked on a feed I hadn't viewed yet, a location name I didn't recognize, and the image that loaded was slightly different from the others. It was the same low quality, the same fixed angle, but the room it showed had something in it. A chair, a folding chair, the kind you'd find in a church basement, set up in the middle of an otherwise empty room. And on the floor near the chair, a small dark object I couldn't identify, a bag, maybe, or a piece of clothing. The timestamp was 3 days old. I felt something shift in my chest, not dramatically. Not the way it happens in stories, just a small recalibration, like a lens adjusting. 3 days, not 4 years, 3 days. I went back to the other feeds I'd viewed before. Same locations, same angles, but now I looked at the timestamps more carefully, and I realized something I'd missed or perhaps hadn't wanted to see. The timestamps were not all old. Some of them were, but others were recent, weeks, days, and a few were from that same day. I need to describe what it feels like to realize that something you assumed was an archive is actually ongoing. It isn't dramatic. It is more like discovering that a window you thought looked out onto a photograph actually looks out onto the world. The image doesn't change, your understanding of it does, and then you can't go back. I began watching the feeds with recent timestamps more carefully. Most of them still showed empty spaces, but now the emptiness felt different because it was current emptiness. These cameras were on, right now, pointed at rooms and hallways and roads that existed in the same present I existed in. And if the feed with the folding chair showed that someone had been in that room 3 days ago, then these cameras were not just watching spaces. They were watching for people. About a week later, I saw a person. It was late, past midnight, and I was clicking through feeds I hadn't viewed before, working my way down the list. I clicked on a location name, and the feed loaded, and there was a figure standing in what appeared to be a doorway. They were facing away from the camera. They were wearing a backpack and holding something in their right hand, a phone, I think, using its light. They stood there for a long time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, not moving. Then they stepped through the doorway and were gone. The timestamp was current, within the hour. I sat there for a long time after that. I want to say I felt fear, but that isn't exactly right. What I felt was exposure, as though by watching this person, I had made myself adjacent to something I didn't have a framework for. This wasn't a documentary. This wasn't content. No one had consented to this. A person had walked into an abandoned building, alone, probably believing they were unobserved, and I had watched them from somewhere else, through a camera they didn't know about, on a site that had no name and no stated purpose. I closed the laptop and didn't open it for 3 days. When I went back, it was with the intention of looking more carefully at the site itself. I wanted to understand what it was, who maintained it, how the cameras were placed, whether this was a surveillance project, an art installation, some kind of research. I examined the page source. I looked at what I could access without any specialized knowledge, which wasn't much. The site was clean, in the way that something deliberately minimal is clean. There were no external links, no tracking pixels that I could identify, no cookies, no login, no way to create an account, or leave a comment, or interact with the content at all. You could only watch. The list of locations I noticed had grown since my first visit. Not by much, 2 or 3 new names. I didn't recognize them. I clicked on one and saw a stretch of road I couldn't place. Filmed from what seemed like a low angle, maybe from a camera mounted near the ground. The road was empty. The timestamp was current. It was around this time that I made a decision I've thought about every day since. I'd been reading about a location not far from where I live. An old facility, closed for decades, fenced but accessible in the way that most fenced places are accessible, which is to say the fence had gaps, and the gaps were known. I'd seen photographs of it online. I'd read accounts from people who had walked through it. I'd never gone myself because I never had a reason to, but the name of this facility was on the list. I want to be precise about my reasoning, because I've replayed it many times, and I need you to understand that it made sense at the time. I thought, if I go to this place, and the site has a camera there, I'll see myself on the feed. And if I see myself on the feed, I'll know the cameras are real and current. And if I know that, I'll have something concrete. Not a feeling, not a suspicion, a fact. And a fact I told myself is manageable, A fact can be reported, investigated, explained. I wanted an explanation. I wanted the settling feeling back. I went on a Saturday morning. I won't describe the location in detail. I'll say only that it was about what I expected. Overgrown, quiet, concrete and brick, broken windows, the smell of water damage, and old leaves. I walked through it slowly, the way anyone walks through a place like that, with attention and a mild, irrational sense that I was being watched. Which, if my theory was correct, I was. I spent maybe 40 minutes inside. I took a few photographs with my phone. I didn't see any cameras, but I also didn't know what I was looking for. A camera can be very small. A camera can look like nothing. I went home. I showered. I made coffee. I opened the site. I found the location name on the list and clicked on it. The feed loaded. I saw the room I'd been standing in 2 hours earlier. Same angle, same light. The feed was empty now, but the timestamp was current, and in the lower portion of the frame, near the left edge, I could see a footprint in the dust on the floor. I couldn't be certain it was mine, but I knew the shape of the room. I recognized the pattern of debris near the far wall. I'd stood in that room and looked at that wall and thought about nothing in particular, and now I was looking at the room from a different angle, from above and to the right, and the room was looking back at me through my own screen. I scrolled the feed backward. I don't know how I knew I could do this. I think I dragged the timestamp and it responded. The image shifted, rewound, and I saw myself. There I was, standing in the room, looking at the far wall. The image was grainy and compressed, and the color was wrong, shifted toward green the way low. Light footage often is, but it was me, my jacket, my posture. The way I hold my shoulders when I am standing still, which is slightly uneven, a habit I've been told about but have never been able to correct. I watch myself turn, look at something on the ground, take out my phone, and take a photograph. Then, I watch myself leave the room. The feed continued. The empty room, the footprint, the dust settling. I want to tell you that this was the moment I became afraid, but that still isn't the right word. The feeling was more like recognition, not of myself on the screen, although that was part of it. Recognition of a pattern I've been inside of without seeing it. I had found the site because I was interested in dead places. The site existed because someone else was interested in the people who visit dead places. I was the subject. I had always been the subject. The hobby, the forum, the photograph metadata, the URL. None of it felt random anymore. It felt like a path, and I could not tell whether I had walked it or been led down it. I tried to be rational. I told myself there were explanations. Urban exploration communities sometimes set up cameras to document locations remotely. Artists have done projects like this. Researchers study how people interact with abandoned spaces. There is always an explanation, and the explanation is always less interesting than the fear. But the explanations didn't account for the site's anonymity. They didn't account for the lack of any identifying information, any stated purpose, any way to contact whoever maintained it. They didn't account for the scope, dozens of locations, possibly more, each with a camera, each apparently maintained and operational over a period of years. That requires resources, that requires intention, and the intention was invisible, which is what made it so difficult to sit with. I decided to stop. I closed the site. I cleared my browser history. I told myself that whatever this was, my involvement with it was over. I had seen what there was to see. I had no obligation to do anything more. I was not in danger. Nothing on the site had threatened me. Nothing on the site had even acknowledged me, except in the passive, mechanical way that a camera acknowledges whatever stands in front of it. I lasted 4 days. When I went back, the site had changed. Not dramatically. The layout was the same. The list was the same, or nearly the same. But there was a new location at the bottom of the list, and the name was one I recognized immediately, because it was where I live. Not my street, not my address, the name of my town. I clicked on it, and the feed that loaded showed a stretch of sidewalk. I recognized the sidewalk. I recognized the tree beside it, a particular tree with a split trunk that I pass every day when I walk to the corner store. The camera angle was low, maybe knee height, pointed slightly upward, and the timestamp was current. And as I watched, a person walked through the frame, a stranger, someone I didn't know, walking a dog, passing through the shot and out of it, unaware. I closed the laptop. I want to describe the quality of the silence in my apartment after I closed it. It was the same silence that had been there before. The refrigerator humming, the building settling, purposeless sound without an audience. Except now, I was the audience, and I was also the subject. And the distinction between the two had collapsed in a way I didn't know how to repair. I haven't gone back to the site. It has been several weeks. I've thought about reporting it, but I don't know what I would report, or to whom. I've thought about telling someone, but the telling always sounds like a story, and stories have a shape, and this doesn't have a shape. It is just there. It is ongoing. The cameras are still on. The feeds are still running. The list is still growing. I find myself thinking about the other people on the feeds, the figure in the doorway with the backpack, the person who left the folding chair, all the people who visited dead places and left footprints in the dust and walked back into their lives without knowing they'd been recorded. I think about the forum user who first told me about the archive, who cleared their history and said they weren't sure they wanted to find it again. I think about whether they went back. I think about whether they're still going back. I think about the fact that I found the URL and the metadata of a photograph, and that other people are finding photographs of these same places every day, and that some of those photographs might contain the same kind of embedded string, waiting for someone with the right combination of curiosity and patience, and inability to leave things alone. I think about the new location at the bottom of the list, my town, the sidewalk I walk on, the tree with the split trunk. I think about whether the camera is still there, and whether I've walked past it since, and whether someone, somewhere, is watching a feed of me walking to the store to buy coffee, and whether they feel the same quiet settling I felt when I watched empty rooms late at night, and whether they've started to wonder about the person on their screen, the way I wondered about the person in the doorway. I think about the fact that I described this site as watching dead places, but the places aren't dead. I was wrong about that. The buildings are empty, but the cameras are alive, the feeds are alive, the list is alive, and the distance between a dead place and a living one might be nothing more than a camera and someone willing to watch. I walk to the store in the mornings, I buy coffee, I come home. The tree with the split trunk is still there. I don't look for the camera. I've decided not to look for the camera. This is, I think, the only decision I have left that still belongs to me, and I am holding onto it carefully, the way you hold on to something small that you know you are going to drop. The site is still there. I know this because I can feel it the way you can feel a light on in a room you are not looking at. It is still there, and the list is still growing.